One of the biggest things that I've seen just over the last since 2004 has been the decline of progressive media on platforms like talk radio, terrestrial radio, and even television. Do you think that those changes that we've seen, and I think I've heard someone call it the democratization of media, do you think that has had a major impact on progressives that hasn't been seen on conservative or conservative radio? Or what do you think is the cause and the disparity of the presence of liberal and progressive media?
Well, I think they're very different dynamics, and I'm trying to remember who wrote the piece. There was a great piece in was it on Alternet? No, I don't think so. No, it was Politico. It was Politico back about 6, 8 months ago, maybe even a year ago, about how heavily subsidized conservative radio is. How conservative radio hosts are getting personal subsidies or pass-through subsidies in the form of quote advertising or speaking fees or book fees or whatever, to the tune of I think in Limbaugh's case it was 6, 7, 8 million bucks a year. In Hannity's case it was a couple million a year. And then you go down the food chain to the people who are just on 100 little radio stations around the country, but they're the right-wing voices, and they're getting a $500,000, $250,000 a year in subsidies for basically pretty much anything that they do. There's a whole infrastructure to support that, of foundations, and I have a friend who's a conservative talk show host, or an acquaintance, I should say, more. But in any case, we talk fairly candidly with each other, and his thing is, if he goes out and gives a speech, if I go out and give a speech, maybe the organization will pay a speaking fee. Typically, they don't. And usually the speaking fee is like, hey, here's $1,000, or they'll let me sell some books, which I would rather have a bookstore come in and do, frankly, and that's it. If he gives a speech, even if only 5 people show up, there's a foundation that'll write him a $20,000 check for having given a speech, for spreading the message, and it's really just a form of subsidy. And there's dozens of these right-wing foundations that do this for right-wingers in the media. So much of the conservative media, at least in the radio landscape, is heavily subsidized in ways that are not all that visible. And there's no parallel to that on the left. There was for a brief period of time with Air America, but Air America was so badly run. The management of Air America was so badly run, and it was initially so badly underfunded that it never had an opportunity to succeed. I mean, keep in mind, Fox News, when Rupert Murdoch, Roger Ailes had suggested something like Fox News to Richard Nixon when he worked inside the Nixon White House.
Wow.
And tried to, I wrote a chapter about this in my book, The Crash of 2016, and for that reason, Fox has not invited me back on the network since, but which is fine. But Roger Ailes pitched this thing to Richard Nixon, calling it GOP TV. And Nixon was like, cool, see if you can raise the money. And Ailes could not raise the money for it. And back then, doing television was, more expensive than it is now. But still, he couldn't pull it off. So when he found Rupert Murdoch, a billionaire who was willing to do this, Murdoch said, okay, whatever it takes. And they lost $100 million a year for the first 5 years. They lost almost $500 million before they made their first penny. Air America burned through $17 million in 5 years, I think, and went bankrupt. So, I mean, just compare the numbers there. If Air America had a committed billionaire behind it who was willing to lose $500 million, or there was a television, analog to that was independent and progressive, the media landscape might be very different. But, the sad reality, as you know, is that when a conservative billionaire invests $100,000 or $1 million in conservative media or in conservative politicians, they expect to get back twice their investment in terms of lower taxes and less regulation, so that they can pour more poisons into the streams and air and things. Whereas when a liberal billionaire puts $1 million into Air America, for example, they expect to see their taxes go up. They're not. It's a completely different dynamic. It's investing in society versus investing for yourself. And one of the things that wealth does, I think, for many people, For most people, I think it has a corrosive and corrupting moral influence, essentially. It causes people to start thinking only about themselves and their own personal world, or more and more, and being less concerned with the good of society as a whole.